Pursued, and welcome back to my channel. Let's just get this straight and out of the way. I am apologizing now if I seem more exhausted than usual. There's a lot to catch up on before I really get started and in depth with this video. The last few weeks that I've been posting any sort of video has really been just solely travel, and I really feel bad for that because, like I said, and I have mentioned in every fashion video that I start to make, that I've been focusing a lot of my channel on fashion, or on on travel. With that traveling, you may see and notice I'm exhausted now. Not to say that I don't like traveling, but I think everyone needs a break. Because sometimes I don't think people realize how hefty and how exhausting traveling can be, as relaxing and exhausting it can be. There's both sides, and when I travel, it can be exhausting because you're doing a lot to plan for the trip. A, you're packing. B, sometimes you need to get a hold of means of transportation, you know, driving to the airport, driving to, let's say I just went to Catalina a few weeks ago, if you saw that video. I had to drive out to the boating dock and then from there take a boat to Catalina. There's a lot of different means by traveling that makes it exhausting versus relaxing. And even on top of just the transportation stuff, when you get to the location that you're traveling to, you want to adventure, you want to see what the place you're traveling to has to offer. Condensing or having condensed travels and vlogging it, editing it, planning the trip itself, it's a lot of work. It's been fun. I don't regret any part of traveling. I love traveling. I love doing that part of my life. And I'm very lucky to be experiencing the fact that I can travel. Although it has its ups and downs. And this is the first video I feel like in a long time I could really sit down and kind of just have a chill video. But beside that, even though I haven't had a relaxing weekend when it comes to traveling, I've also, when I go to travel and come back, I go straight back to work. So I've never really just had a chill day. And I think I kind of mentioned that in my last video on Monday, where we will plan something, my boyfriend and I, meaning plan something. We will plan to have like a chill or relaxed day sometime, and then something bound to happen, you know? This is one of those videos where I want it to be as relaxing as possible because I might seem a little bit more exhausted than usual. But beyond that point, this is a video I have been planning to make for a long while now, because I've had a playlist called something of a fashion by the decade or something like that. And let me double check how long when the last video I updated in that playlist was, because I don't even remember. I'm looking at the computer, by the way. I have my computer out so I can reference the decade facts I'm about to tell you guys in a second. I don't want to tell you guys when the last time I literally made one of these videos was, because it's been a very long time. I'm not even looking at the camera anymore. The last time I uploaded in this playlist was February 8th of this year, 2021. We're in September now, so I really haven't touched this playlist in months, legitimate months. It's been about 7 months. It's been half a year. And not to say that I wasn't passionate about this part of my channel, although I didn't feel like many people were interested. And now that I've kind of created a little bit more of a wholesome following, I might try going back to creating and uplifting this playlist to get to whatever it is and it could be. If you guys don't know what this series or playlist is, it's a fashion by the decade where I talk about a certain decade, women's wear, menswear, and possibly child's wear of this decade, depending on the historical facts that I can find. Whatever facts I find and talk to you guys about, it'll be linked down below, so if you guys want to read about it yourselves, you can. And let's just get into it. If it seems like there's a lot of edits, chops, or pauses or anything in this video, I am referencing, like I said, the links, notes, whatever, that are on my laptop. There's that. Let's get into this. So first, this part of this video is going to start with women's wear in the 1930s. Yes, we are starting in the 1930s with this video. Well, we're only going to talk about the 1930s in this video. So starting in the 1930s, if you don't know this historical point of time, the stock market had just crashed in 1929. With that transition with the stock market crashing, a lot of women's fashion wear had changed from having a lot of clothing lines be at the, roaring 20s, the hip waist dresses and stuff. Women's dresses start to kind of flow back into being a longer silhouette, natural looking silhouette situation here. In the 30s, you start to see a lot of women's dresses kind of stick to the silhouette, whereas in the 20s, there was more of a tomboyish, baggy look. It looked a lot more heavy in the 20s. With the length change also, like I just said, comes the curve change. Women's dresses are at an ankle length, if not probably a full floor length, having the curves be hugged a little bit more. Alongside the dresses change, a lot of women women's hair became a lot shorter versus kind of a pinup look. You get the shorter, wavier hair in the 30s. And this is a style I never really liked, but this kind of starts showing in the 30s, is the kind of the flared look where you get the silhouette and everything else hugged, and then when you get to the ankle or about the start of your calf, there's a flare at the bottom of your dress. That was really popular starting in the 30s. And I think a lot of women today get that inspiration from wedding dresses, or like wear those kinds of styles in wedding dresses or prom dresses more often now. But this was a really common trend in the 30s where everyone wore dresses like this. Well, women did. I'm gonna read this part of the article, this video, to you guys because I feel like I can't re-explain it that well, so I'm gonna read it to you guys. And this is gonna be the first link. I'm mostly going off this first link that you guys see in the description. It'll probably be the only link that I'll use, but contributing to the overall slender look of the 30s, kind of what I was talking about with the silhouette. An important development and trend became a rising of the decade sort of thing. A bias cut. The cut fabric on the bias means cutting the fabric at a 45-degree angle against the weave, creating a fluid body skimming garment. And then there was a very famous designer, Vionnet, or if that's how you pronounce it, became kind of popular for this. And then Chanel kind of grew inspiration from that. This is where a lot of the inspiration for night dresses, like I kind of just said, prom dresses came. And you also get a lot more of the lower backs when you see the bias cut. That's kind of, you get a little bit more scandalous, but also that natural confident look that a lot of women I felt like wanted to have. Now you also had a difference in day dresses versus night dresses, because the whole idea was that each sort of dress kind of complemented a woman's body and romanticized it and kind of created this definition of femininity that not a lot of women felt like they had. When the 30s came around, there was a lot more definition and pattern. You got a lot more of the floral prints. You got a lot more of the day wear, where the day wear had the polka dots that a lot of women kind of re-brought back in the early 2000s. You got cheetah print, zebra print, you know, the abstract sort of art. And then by the evening, you had your slim fitting body silhouette complementing night dresses. I felt like in the 20s, you didn't really have a difference in silhouette between the two, whereas now you have more of a difference between day dresses and night dresses. This is also when I felt like a lot of people had this confusion where shoulder padding or added fabric became really popular in the 80s. No, you guys are wrong. If you guys thought the 80s, that's not correct. A lot of the added padding idea came from the 30s, and having extra, you know, shoulder padding or just showing off extra fabrics in certain parts of your body. That came in the 30s era. This was also included with other embellishments. If you had extra jewels on your dress or just anything to add on extra flavor to your dresses with being the dress complement you in any way. Now, this is kind of when you see a lot of these styles be portrayed on film and television, and I think that's really interesting because if you think about the 20s, you have the roaring 20s, you know, you have people wanting, you know, coming out of the war and kind of wanting to have this sort of excitement in life. But I don't think people understand the correlation in history when it comes to Hollywood in particular. Hollywood was a big deal in the 30s and the 40s. Now we'll talk about 40s fashion later. Do you see how exhausted I am? I'll talk about this in the beginning. But I felt like this is a lot of the style. I'm messing up on my words here. This is a lot of the styles you saw in film and television, because obviously this is when everyone was moving to California to want to be a big star in Hollywood. So you see a lot of actresses be portraying this sort of fashion in Hollywood film because this is what was popular at the time. The more fitted silhouette. You also saw a lot more of the glove look, the lacy glove look with the jewels on the dress, and you see the bodice and the hips being tight when you see these women wearing these dresses. It's because Hollywood made these women and the fashion alongside these women become way big. You saw people like Laura Loveday and Joanna Crawford. You see women like them kind of embrace this style. You see them portray what was fashion and what was huge in the 30s. They're some of the biggest examples that we have of fashion and some of the biggest names in the industry of Hollywood, whether they were just there to portray being an actress or they were there to more model what was their current fashion. Now, menswear. Menswear also had changed in the 30s just as much as women's fashion did. Now, this is when the whole idea of the blue-collared male came into play. You kind of had the more social elite and wealthy kind of person come into play. And with having the differences of socioeconomic and social status, you had the changes of suit come into play with that for menswear. In the 1910s, even the 1900s, and the 1920s, a lot of men's suits portrayed the lower socioeconomic status versus the higher. You kind of had the men who went to war, or you had a lot of the men who there wasn't much support in the guy who was the breadwinner or who had a lot of money. And this is when history kind of changes for men in the 30s, that men's suits become more of a sign of wealth versus just what you do or not really having much of a status. Now what men wear kind of shows status at this point. With that, with the socioeconomic change and the social change and everything, men kind of included a little bit more of a traditional piece in their wardrobe and kind of let go of the idea where you had like a formal suit in the evening and kind of created your own wardrobe for yourself as a man. Things like vests and waistcoats became more individualized alongside the kind of boots you wore. Everything became unique to the individual versus being unique to the gender, I suppose, or what job you do. Depending on what kind of suit you had, kind of showed where you were belonging or where you had belonged. Around this time, there was this fabric called a shark skin. It was a synthetic fabric. This was a material that also had become really popular at the time, that was more of a individualistic, traditional approach, if you know what I'm saying. This was a specific fabric that became popular in the 30s alongside for men's suits that became an individualistic piece. Because a lot of these men, if they had like this kind of fabric, meant that they were of higher socioeconomic status. And with that, a lot of men wore this fabric because it was something they could wear during cold seasons. If you were able to show that you could keep warm during certain seasons, meant you had more money. I feel like in every decade, you kind of still had the idea of different suits, but this became more individualized, that you could wear the same suit now during the evening and the morning, more so towards the season, or when you could wear a specific suit anytime, anywhere, depending on where you were at. It became more individualistic to the person, like I've been sitting here repeating. I feel like, if I recall correctly, and feel free to go back and reference my own video because I didn't even watch my 20s video here to recall anything from similarity to the last decade. Although from what the slim remembrance I do remember, the 20s had specific suits for sportswear for men. In the 30s, that kind of follows suit in similarity, because men had this idea of having to wear trousers and a certain kind of blazer when they went tennis playing, golf playing, whatever the sport was. But this sort of fashion that was in sports that became popular, like the longer trousers now in the 30s, I feel like in the 20s it may have been shorter trousers. In the 30s there were longer trousers, but a lot of these fashion statements that was shown in men's sports, it was what became popular in the 30s for film. I kind of mentioned how women in the 30s kind of had this major bling influence on the film industry. A lot of men's sports fashion is what became popular in the film industry. This is also when a lot of men wore bomber jackets, especially in sports. Now, if you don't know what a bomber jacket is literally a jacket that was inspired by the military. It became really popular to kind of wear similar fashion pieces to what a bomber jacket would have looked like, because you also got to realize between the transition of the 20s and the 30s, we're also still getting out of a war. Not getting out of a war, but still having a lot of influence of fashion based on what we had in the war. Men also had influence with the padded shoulders, just as women did. I don't think that men had it as heavily as women did by adding like the jewelry and the added fabrics, but men also had padded shouldering just as much as women did. This is also one last thing I'm mentioning before I go into childwear for men's fashion. Men started to wear oversized boots and their hat style had changed. I feel like this is kind of the turning point for men changing their hat style. There is more of a flat cap versus men wearing a wider brimmed hat. Although I feel like most everything else is the same because they still kind of followed the Great Depression era's fashion style, but kept it a little bit more different by adding more fabrics, like I said, with the shoulder pads and making longer overcoats and more colorful overcoats for them to wear. Now, childwear, I very much don't dab into this that much compared to men and women. So in women's wear, there was a lot more children that were women that had a lot more natural look when it came to their dresses. There was a lot more cotton being used for women's dresses at this point, and muslin. But you also had a lot more decoration as far as kids' dresses went. There was a lot more ruffles, there was more embroidery in the dresses. There was a lot more individuality with women's dresses for kids. Thank Shirley Temple. Literally, like, she was the star idol during this time, and she was kind of the front scene for 30s fashion because, like I said, a lot of movie stars were rising there during this time, and I think she's one of the perfect examples to show what child's fashion was like, because that was basically her time to be, her being Shirley Temple, rising for the face of children, especially women children, girls, you know. Now, during this time, what was really popular for boys or men children, what am I even saying? Younger gentlemen, was sailor suits. Now, older boys wore kind of a more wool or flannel material as they kind of grew up. Usually as a younger gentleman, younger boy, whatever, you wore a lot more cotton, you wore suspenders, you wore trousers, that sort of thing. And then as you grew older, the material of what you wore had changed. But one big example, if you kind of want to see this reference, is Rose and Joe Kennedy. They were kind of the face of fashion at that point, if you want to see the reference of the picture that I'm showing you guys. That's mainly what boys had wore until they grew out of that stage of being a younger boy and grew into teen years and such, and young adult years. Now, if you compare children's fashion between the 20s and the 30s, the 20s fashion for women, children, and even probably men's boys, what am I even talking about anymore? Women's fashion for girls being in the 30s, you had more of a sack look. Whereas when you went into the 30s, you kind of had more of a decor to what the girls were wearing as far as their dresses went. And after getting out of the Great Depression, a lot of women wanted to have that update to their wardrobe and wanted to have kind of a more natural look than what they had on in the 20s. You know, it was very unflattering, I feel like. Even whether you were an adult or a child, a lot of the clothes you wore didn't really fit your style, or you couldn't be as individualistic until you hit this decade after being in the 20s. All right, and that's the end of this spiel. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope to make more of these videos soon. I mean, considering this is one of those videos that is just a break, I suppose, but I hope you guys couldn't tell that I was that exhausted. I already feel like you guys have, but I hope you guys have a good day, a good night, a good slumber whenever you're watching this, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.